Welcome to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast. This is Corey Shapiro. Today, we're having a conversation about mindfulness with, I know her as Zoe, my yoga teacher, but for you, it's Dr. Zoë Slatoff. Welcome, Zoe, to my podcast.
Thank you, Corey. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. And I really mean that because I find your teachings and your way and everything about you to be inspiring. So thank you so much. And I hope you're going to do that for our listeners today. We have a real treat today because, if you're coming to this podcast and you're in that, stressful state that everyone is when they're in a divorce and you're looking for some clarity, some composure, that's why I'm doing this conversation about mindfulness. If you're listeners, I end my podcast with be creative and not reactive. And we're going to go deep today on being not reactive. And if you stay to the end, Zoe will give us a guided meditation. She will help us through this process to hopefully gain a little composure. So again, welcome to the podcast. Let me tell people what you're doing now because it's interesting to me because you've made some shifts yourself in your life. You used to be a full-time, I believe a full-time yoga teacher. You had a beautiful shala on the Upper West Side. And now you're a full-time professor, you're an author, and you're actually the clinical professor of Sanskrit at Loyola Marymount University in LA. And Zoe, I'm in New York still, and it's February. So, a great day is like in the 40s and the 50s. Please tell me what the temperature is there so I can feel even more sad that you're on a different coast to me.
I mean, it's not as warm as it sometimes is, but it is in the 50s, probably 60s today. And yes, the rains have passed. The sun is out again. It's pretty nice. Can't complain.
Yeah, I don't remember Zoe ever saying it was pretty nice when it was February in Manhattan. I don't remember that. So I'm glad you're having this wonderful life. Tell me about this transition being a professor. How's that going for you?
It's wonderful. I mean, I guess I'm a teacher. I've been teaching since I was 18. That's when I started teaching yoga. And to me, it just feels like a new vehicle for what I do, but it's sort of the same thing, yeah, in a different form.
Yeah, I mean, you really are an educator. I think you come from a family of educators. Is that right?
My grandfather was an English professor at Cornell, so I definitely grew up with some of that.
Yeah, it's definitely in your blood, Zoe. You're such a good teacher. My mom was a teacher. She's retired now, and I love educating and reading and learning and people who can explain difficult things in a way that's accessible. Those are the best teachers, and I think you really can do that well. So when you cross path with yoga all those years ago, what mindset shifts did you have coming into it? Did you have any preconceived notions about yoga compared to what you're thinking about it today?
I mean, yoga was different back then. I mean, now it's everywhere and everybody's heard of yoga and everybody has ideas, but I actually got introduced to it through a videotape, if we remember those. And
Yeah, not YouTube. It
some
wasn't on YouTube.
no YouTube yet. Um, Somebody gave my mom a video and I tried it and I loved it. And it was this guy, Rodney Yee, on the beach doing like 40 minutes of yoga. And I don't know, I knew it made me feel good. And even at 15, I got up early before school and just did it every morning at 5 a.m. And I really didn't know what it was yet. I just knew that it made me feel good. It made me feel more peaceful. And I love doing the same thing every day. I mean, I will say, since we're talking about divorce, or since you talk about divorce, um, my parents got divorced when I was 3, and I grew up going back and forth every day. My mother's house on Monday, my father's house on Tuesday, my mother's house on Wednesday, my father's house on Thursday. And when I discovered that I could do this same thing every day, it was just this revelation, and it was so grounding, and it gave me so much stability and peace. And yeah, later when I discovered Ashtanga, which also you do the same thing every day, to me, that was the most exciting thing.
I mean, you said so much, and I didn't realize that your parents got divorced so young. My parents got divorced when I was 8, and it really impacted my career choice and also choosing yoga and all the mindfulness things I do. But it's nice that you were able to see this as a practice to help you so young because I didn't figure this out until my 30s. So there you go. That's what happens when you're on a better path. So I appreciate that. But before people, um, are confused by this word Ashtanga. Tell people a little bit about what Ashtanga is and how it relates to yoga and mindfulness.
I mean, the word Ashtanga is a Sanskrit word, which literally means the 8 parts, and it refers to a system that's a pretty old, around 400 CE. Um, written, it refers to the Yoga Sutra, if anybody's heard of that, of Patanjali. And traditionally, there are these 8 parts of yoga. But the one that we tend to practice is posture, asana, which is the 3rd part. Um, so what we call Ashtanga yoga today, usually, or what mean when I say Ashtanga yoga, is the Ashtanga yoga of Pattabhi Joyce, who was my teacher, which is a particular kind of practice. If you've heard of vinyasa, most vinyasa practices come from Ashtanga originally, and it's a set sequence of postures joined together by breath. And the breath is the most important part, as we'll be talking about later. And again, what I love about this practice, many things, but I love the regularity of it. And, when I was 15, I wasn't like, oh, this gives me the stability that I don't think it was a thought thing, but I just knew something felt good. And so I should keep doing it because other things didn't feel good. And as they don't when you're a teenager. So,
Yeah, no, that's so smart, Zoe, about I know what you mean when intuitively you know things are good, but the wisdom there is that you chose to do the good things. When I was then, I was probably choosing to do the bad things.
we did the bad
And
things too. It wasn't
oh, okay.
instead.
Okay. Thank you for making me feel okay with that.
I
Right. And
absolutely did that too.
so we're all a journey here. We're all on a different path. One thing that was interesting to me when I was finding, I guess teachers of yoga and where I found you is just, it seems like anyone can be a yoga teacher. And to me, it's not a regulated profession like becoming an attorney, it's regulated. But you studied under what I would consider one of the Einsteins, one of the real powerhouses of yoga, especially Ashtanga. And how did having someone like that as your teacher really, I guess, change your mindset with your own mindfulness practice?
I mean, it was huge. I studied engineering originally at Cooper Union in New York, and I had been practicing, and I met my teacher. He was from Mysore in India, but he was in New York, and I practiced with him every day for a month. And at the end, he said, "Come to Mysore," and I said, "Okay." And I quit school and I went to India, which of course, not everybody's going to do. But
To say the least, Zoe, it's crazy.
I feel very lucky to have, been able to just trust my gut in that way and to make that happen. But yeah, I mean, and again, back then there were not that many people teaching yoga, and it was very different than it is now. Um, So, yeah, I feel very fortunate to have I kept going back to India for many years and then brought it back with me, and people kept asking me to teach, so I taught, and very different than all the teacher trainings these days.
Yeah, well, what would you say about him? Was just being around that environment, and I know his family. I mean, he was practicing. When did he start practicing yoga?
I mean, he started practicing very young. He ran away from home, in fact, to practice yoga with Krishnamacharya, his teacher. But he was so inspiring. I mean, as I said, when he said to come to Mysore, I just quit school. There was not a question in my head, and being around him was inspiring in that way. And it just made me think, see this other way of being around him made me feel calm. Being around him made me feel present. I feel, yeah, really fortunate to have gotten to spend that time with him. He also was a Sanskritist, and so I would hear him quote verses in Sanskrit, and I'm a very curious person, so I started studying Sanskrit my first trip to India also because I just wanted to know what he was saying.
Wow. That was wonderful that he inspired you in such a right direction. Did you ever see him, and I'm sure, I mean, he is a human, but did you ever see him when he was teaching ever get angry or anything like that? Or just it's always a calm presence that you were always around him?
I mean, he had a wonderful combination of being both strict and loving. Um,
Mm,
so he could kind of yell at people and then laugh. And he was very different with different people. I don't know if it was because I was so young or just because he intuited what I needed, but he was always very gentle with me. And, it's one of the things that I took as a teacher, from his guidance is that every student needs different medicine. And, we each need different things in different moments. And so that's part of my job as a teacher. I mean, both as a yoga teacher and as an academic teacher is to try to give different students what they need. And he
yeah.
was he was a master at that.
Well,
Um,
I think you're also a master at that. I mean, when I came to your shala on the Upper West Side all those years ago, I first started out, my entry into yoga was hot power yoga because I was still focusing on the body, and then I sort of got evolved to I guess an Ashtanga practice. I didn't really understand a lot of it, but I was doing it at a different place. And when I came to you, I kind of felt you gave me what I needed, just like your teacher gave you what you needed. And my biggest fear was I couldn't do it because I'm not flexible. And saying that now is funny, but that was my notion. And it was such a strong feeling I had. And you dispelled that like that. Like that's not really what this is about.
I
And
mean, so many people have that idea like, oh, I'm not flexible enough. I'm not this enough. I'm not that enough. But it's really not what yoga's about. Yoga's about the mind. It's the body is just a vehicle towards, being aware of your mind, watching your mind, and being able to calm your mind and really to be able to change your mental patterns. I mean, the Sanskrit text I was speaking of earlier, the Yoga Sutra, it defines yoga as really learning how to calm your mind, how to still the mental fluctuations. And I always think of it as like it's like you're sort of learning to have a volume button. And so, we all have these repetitive thoughts in our head that go around and sort of get in our way. And it's learning to turn the volume down on those repetitive thoughts. And then you can start to replace them with maybe a more helpful thought. And so you can kind of turn the volume button up on that more helpful thought or those more helpful thoughts. So it's really about learning to control your mind. And most of us, though, it's really hard to sit still and just meditate. And so for a lot of people, doing some sort of yoga practice allows us to move while we learn how to do this. Which for many people, and certainly for me as a teenager and, in my 20s, and even now really it's more fun. Um, to be able to move your body at the same time as watching and learning how to control your mind in a certain way.
yeah, no, I love how we're transitioning into the point of this because I'm not asking my listeners to have a deep yoga practice to start. That's not the point of this, but it really is to try to use some of those benefits that I've learned from yoga, which is really about the mind. And, for people who are listening to this, who are having a strong reaction, who hear mindfulness and just say, not for me, I don't need any help. And it sort of reminds me of some people I tell like maybe it'd be helpful to have some therapy. And it's just like this strong, immediate no reaction. But I always tell people, like, listen, if the number one tennis player in the world can have a coach, you could have a coach. You could have someone that can help you. What would you say to someone who's having these strong reactions, like, this is just not for me?
I mean, I definitely invite people to try it and to try different things, because you might go to one yoga class and hate it and then go to another one and really like it. And so not to judge all by one. And also there are many forms, and mindfulness can happen in many ways. I moved to California 2 years ago, and as a born and bred New Yorker, um, just learned how to drive a year and a half ago, which, I mean, to me, it has given me so much empathy for my students, because I was the worst driving student. I took 40 hours worth of driving lessons. I When I first started driving, I was like, "No, I hate this, and I'm never gonna go above 25 miles an hour." And, I live in LA where that's just not how it works. I have to get on 5 freeways sometimes to get to work and drive 70, but I had to build my way up to it, and I had to push past and breathe through all of my resistance, and I had so much resistance. I had so much resistance, I spent a year thinking I was going to die every time I got in my car, especially as I was learning to drive on the freeways, but I knew that it was, going to be a good thing for me, and I kind of had to turn the driving into a meditation and just allow myself to be really, really present and to remind myself to breathe, which it turns out, even after many, many years of breathing practice, I was forgetting to breathe when I was driving. So,
Joey,
um,
it's so good to hear that even you who, I look up to so much, but you're just human. You have all these struggles too, but you're applying these techniques in a situation that's challenging for you. Just like I'm hopeful that some of these things that we're going to talk about, people can apply in a divorce context, where it seems like so insurmountable, like, like driving and you're only going to go above 25 miles an hour, or like, I'm never going to get through this. And I hear a lot like, I'm never going to get remarried, or I'm never going to get through this. And of course you do get through it. But we're throwing around these ideas about being mindful. What would you say, just as a general, definition of that, of what does it mean to be mindful as opposed to being mindless?
it really means to pay attention, and to cultivate a sense of awareness. And I mean, mindfulness is an old practice. And it comes from the word sati, in Pali, or smriti in Sanskrit, and it is this sort of it's a cultivation of focus, of awareness, and of learning to watch what your mind is doing, because our minds do so many things all the time, and most of the time we just sort of let them do it and we're not even aware. I've been teaching this year an undergraduate Buddhism course, and as part of that course, we read a lot of texts, and of course, but we talk about ideas. But I do a little meditation practice with them every class, and the first thing I always teach them is, just to sort of pay attention, and then to sort of have an anchor. Often, this anchor is the breath. I'll talk about this more when we do a little practice at the end, but having something to anchor yourself. And then what happens, and always, especially after the first couple of times I do this with my students, at the end, they all say, "Oh, I didn't know my mind was so busy." Our minds are just so busy all the time, and we don't even stop to realize it. And we think, "Oh, I have that's my mind. I have no control." But we do have some control, and part of that is, learning to be in the present, sort of letting the future stay in the future, letting the past stay in the past, and just learning to be in the present, which is hard.
Yeah. It's interesting because, when you're dealing in a contested divorce, you're dealing with people who have high sophistication with persuasion, just like marketers know how to convince us to buy things we don't need. And a lot of times, we're having this conversation on a Friday, so I'm thinking when you were talking how lawyers influence our mind, because a lot of times they send us these obnoxious emails on Fridays, usually Friday afternoons, with the expectation that we're going to forward this to our clients. And it took me a while, but many years ago, one of my clients was like, "Why do you always forward this to me on Friday? You're ruining my weekend. I don't want to read this stuff." So I tell you now, I don't even want to forward basically anything the opposing counsel says. I have to, but I do it in times what I think they're going to be thinking about their case, which is maybe Monday, not Friday, so they at least can have a little respite over the weekend to enjoy their life in the time they can. So I think that is a great point. And you made me think about also, which I want to talk about, to get people into doing these moments of more intentional practice, of being more mindful, of thinking of stealing time. Because I know, or I believe your practice, your yoga practice is about 90 minutes. Is that right? A day?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
She says it so softly. See,
Sorry.
that's nothing to be embarrassed about, Zoe. My
Yes.
practice is about an hour. I always tell people I'm a black belt. Zoe's like a 10th degree black belt, but this is the level they do. And also, I've seen Zoe practice, and she is so present in her practice when other people are around, which I find to be challenging. I never knew how you did it. You were so good at that. But to start, just to start, because if people are like 90 minutes, an hour, that's too much, Corey. Who has time for that? And the answer is you're just going to have to get up earlier. And the response usually is no, I'd like to sleep. That's usually the response. So
Fair
if
enough.
you can, yeah, fair enough. So Zoe has heard this before. So if we're going to have people trying to steal some moments from their life to fit in a mindfulness practice, maybe just a 5-minute daily practice. I said 5 minutes, everyone, just to get you going, like a baby practice, if you will.
5
Um,
minutes is great, though. I mean, 5 minutes is a lot. 5 minutes of being present is
Is a lot. Okay. See, that's how, see, when I first started, I'm like, 5 minutes. See, I have a negative outlook. So, yes, thank you, Zoe, for making me more positive. 5 minutes, if we're starting from
and
zero, 5 minutes is great.
and
And
consistency is way more important than quantity. So, 5 minutes a day, I would say, is much better than an hour once a week.
that's like I'm learning piano now. And that's sort of what I take from that. I have to do it consistent like that, which is sort of my
Exactly.
own, another mindfulness practice I'm doing. Okay. So here's three practices I thought you can do in this wonderful 5-minute daily practice. I will give you 6 days. Even Ashtanga only does it 6 days. It sort of reminds me like when you go to a therapist and they say it's an hour, but it's really only 45 minutes. So it's only 6 days a week. And here's my here's my three things that I want to know, Zoe, if you think these are the three things that we should start off. And then I want Zoe hopefully to give us some detailed explanations and walk us through it. Okay, so the three things I thought for a 5-minute daily practice would be having some short, maybe 1 minute breathing technique, could be less, having maybe a 30-second or even a shorter mantra, and then having some type of, to start, a guided meditation, which would move into just your own meditation. So what do you think about those three things? And would you have different ones?
I think those sound great. As I mentioned, in meditation practice, you often want to have an anchor, right? Something to focus yourself on. And the breath tends to be, the easiest one, and maybe the easiest way to connect your mind to your body, because we all breathe, right? Some of us are more aware of it than others, but we have to breathe to stay alive. And so one of the first things I think that's interesting is just, noticing, is it easier to inhale? Is it easier to exhale? I think often when you're dealing with stressful situations, it might be hard to inhale or it might be hard to exhale. And it's different for different people. But I think just starting to be aware of, where your breath gets caught, what your natural tendencies are, and then counting the breath can be really helpful. So inhaling maybe for a count of 4 and then exhaling for a count of 4. And the various ways to pay attention to the breath. You can pay attention to the breath at the belly. You could pay attention in the nostrils. And there isn't a right or wrong way to do it. It's just finding a way that you can focus.
Yeah, so I like this. So the first technique is to be aware of your breath, being aware of inhaling for 4 seconds, having a free inhale, making sure you're exhaling for a free 4 seconds, and look when you're tight. And what I've noticed, as you said, when things are challenging, we have a tendency to hold our breath. And in a divorce situation, I see this where people feel so strongly about their position. And when they hear the other side's position, and if it's different from their position, it's almost like they can't hear. They can't hear the other side, and they get very tight. So I think
Mhm.
in that moment, could be a really great time to notice when you're hearing someone, am I breathing? Because that's your
Exactly, and
stressful
that's
time.
the inhale, right? The inhale is receiving and the exhaling is the letting go, the giving.
Yeah, I think I have to do that when I listen to the judge, when the judge basically tells me they don't like my client's position. I know when I was practicing with you, when you used to put me into these poses, which my body did not like, I was not breathing properly. I was holding it. You always reminded me to keep on breathing. So that's really good. So that's the first technique, is just to be aware when you're in this stressful situation. Now Zoe's a good driver. She doesn't have to worry about it with driving, but that's what she had to start with.
I worry a little
And
bit. Every once in a while, we just had all this rain and there are constantly new situations to learn to breathe in.
right. Yeah. Even when you have a practice, it's still a practice, and there's going to be moments when you are going to be tight, and that's just the way it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so that's great. That's the first practice where we are more aware of when we're constricted with our breathing, and that could be we're getting to our 5 minutes. So I'm going to say that could be a minute. So now you only have 4 minutes left of your mindfulness, and we talked about having a mantra. Tell us a little bit about what a mantra is, and what mantra would you suggest people use?
I mean, the word mantra actually means an instrument of the mind, which I think is so brilliant. It's an instrument of thought. It's something for your mind to do, right? All of these practices give our mind something to do so they can stop worrying, even if it's for 5 minutes. And you can go back to worrying 5 minutes later and none of it'll all still be there. But just giving yourself a little bit of a break. Um, and so again, what a mantra does is it focuses the mind. It can be anything that you want. It can be a phrase. It can be a word, and what that word is may be very individual. Sometimes a teacher gives people a mantra. But I was thinking earlier, the word sukha in Sanskrit, it means happiness. Um, Sukha as opposed to dukkha, which is suffering. And so if we want to go from dukkha to sukha, what they literally mean, dukkha means bad space and sukha means good space. And so it's kind of a nice idea to be thinking about moving into a good space, and maybe other people have ideas of what this is for them. Maybe there's something, I don't know, when I am going through something challenging, or have something to do, aside from being present, it also helps me to kind of draw a line to the other side. And so to imagine something on the other side that I'm looking forward to and can kind of put my mind on. And so maybe there's something that represents that good space for each person.
I love that because I always say to people, our post divorce goals are pulling us to act better in these moments that are stressful, that we get triggered, that that's a tendency to act at our worst. And to have this saying, this sukha, to remind us in those moments where we're flooded, where, you know, we don't have much brain capacity at those moments. We are reactive. And
Mhm.
we all get reactive at times. Even Zoe gets reactive, when she started driving. That's just the way it is. And if we can just have something simple like sukha, sukha. And do I keep on saying it? Do I just like, am I
Usually that's
repeat?
what you do with the mantras. You just repeat it over and over and over and over. Sukha, 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 sukha.
Do I do it quietly or out loud?
Either way, you can do it quietly in your head, then you can do it on the subway. Um, you can also do it out loud. All of these are techniques, and so there are many ways to do them, and different things will resonate for different people.
Hmm.
And
No.
yeah, I think partly just having perspective too, sort of knowing that whatever it is in the moment that's overwhelming, it will eventually change. And for me, that's one thing that practice really does. It just sort of, it reminds me, it gives me this safe space that where I have maybe a little bit of perspective.
No, I love that, Zoe. That's that little, maybe all we need to snap out of it. Like with my dog, sometimes when I leave in the morning, she's like this little 10-pound, cute, perfect little, I call her Puchka. And when I leave, she's like a terror. She's like literally Cujo. And I wish I could do something to give her a mantra to just calm down for a moment. Like, I'm not abandoning you forever. I will be back really soon. So
Yeah, maybe
it's
teaching a dog perspective is harder. um,
yes.
Just another word people, that might be a nice mantra is shanti. Shanti means peace. It's another good word to repeat. Shanti, shanti, shanti.
Now these are great, and I appreciate that, giving people, pulling them out of this reactive mode with these shanti or sukha. I think that's really helpful. Pulling them for what they really want, which is a better post-divorce life. I mean, that's really what they want, and being more mindful in their choices. So let's end this. So now we have at least probably only that was another minute at least. So now we have only 3 minutes, maybe even 2.5 minutes left of our daily practice. Halfway there. Let's finish it with this guided meditation. Zoe, tell us a little bit about, first of all, why meditation is so important, and how, is it something I have to do daily, and a little bit about it for people who are not really that familiar.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's something consistency is most important. And it doesn't have to be something that you necessarily sit down and do. It can be something where, you're doing the dishes and you're just doing it being fully present. We're all these days so used to doing so many things at once, right? And I mean, I'm guilty of it too. But just taking time where it's like I am only doing the dishes. It's why I've actually started to come to love driving because I can't, when I'm on the freeway, I can't answer my emails. It's great. I just have to be present. But we can do it, you can do it if you're out walking your dog. You can do it. We have so many opportunities to be present. You can do it when you're eating. You can do it sipping a cup of coffee in the morning, or it doesn't have to be some big, oh, I'm now going to do my meditation practice. It can, and those things can work together, but I think, it's you can kind of start anywhere. And I mean, what happens, I would say, if you just sort of make 5 minutes just to sit and do it, is that you're kind of carving out time just for that and carving out time to learn to watch your mind. And I think more than anything, that's what it is just being aware of what your mind is doing and maybe having a little bit of control and over what it's doing. And, there are various ways to do this. There are a few things that I really like to do with my students. Visualization tends to appeal to a lot of people. So sometimes I imagine that our thoughts are clouds. And so when you have a thought, you kind of label it thinking and you let it be a cloud and it just sort of blows across the sky of your mind. And so sometimes visualizing helps. Similarly, you can imagine an ocean and imagine that each thought is just a wave. And, when you have this thought, rather than following the thought, because that's what we do, right? The thoughts are not the problem. The problem is what we do in response to the thoughts. So we have a thought and we think about the thought, we respond, we react to the thought, right? We get angry, we get sad, but if we can take a pause, and just sort of, okay, rather than following the thought, it's just a wave. I'm going to allow the wave to dissolve into the ocean. Um, and so I think this can be a really powerful technique if somebody is feeling reactive or feeling triggered to like, just going to take a couple minutes. I'm going to, breathe and watch my mind. And then you can react maybe in a way, or respond in a way that's less reactive,
Yeah.
from a deeper place.
Yeah, I am a big proponent. In my book, I talk about it on this podcast all the time, a 24-hour pause in the sense of those, those email exchanges or those text exchanges, those toxic text exchanges. And it
Mhm.
starts at that 24 hours. If you're just ruminating, getting more and more upset, you're not going to feel better in 24 hours. You're going to probably need another year. But the point is, if you can, you're right, right. So the point is, if you can change what you're thinking about, that's really the work that the 24 hours is supposed to do. And for people who are like 24 hours is not enough, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
not. Sometimes it's a week, but you might only have 24 hours. They say go these high end negotiation. They call it go to the balcony, but this is really going to the balcony in your mind. Taking a break in your mind.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think
And a
that's
little
really
goes a
helpful.
long way. I think that's, yeah, the biggest thing.
Zoe, that's why you're such a good teacher. You're like 5 minutes is great. A little goes a long way. If you're looking for an amazing yoga teacher, and sorry, Zoe's gone, she's like retired. This is what you're looking for. It's not someone who is going to make you feel like you have to do something and like it's so far outside of your comfort zone. What you said in the beginning about it has to feel good, even I think as a child or a teenager, you said that. I think
Mhm.
that's the point. I'm not saying Zoe didn't push me, but she didn't push me to the extent that I didn't want to come back and keep on going, right?
You have to love it. If that for me is whatever I'm teaching, that's number one. If you don't love it, you're not going to do it. And so if I can get people to fall in love with the practice, the study, whatever, I say the same thing teaching Sanskrit that, I want to teach my students to fall in love with it. And then the rest will happen.
Okay, so with the rest happening, I'm going to be your student here in your guided meditation. Take it away.
All right. So, wherever you are, if you can find a comfortable seat, if you're sitting in a chair, you can put your feet flat on the ground and just trying to feel a sense of stability in your body. So, feeling your hips dropping down and feeling the crown of your head rising up. And as much as you can, try to lengthen your spine. You can close your eyes, or if that's not comfortable, take your gaze just softly a little bit in front of you, but try to not look at something that's moving. So just having a still point, either inside or outside. And then bringing your awareness inside of your body. So before we try to do anything, just taking a moment to be aware without judgment of wherever you are. So, noticing if you feel tired, if you feel energized, if you feel anxious, if you feel depressed, if you feel happy or sad, whatever it is, just noticing it without judgment, becoming aware of Not the thoughts about the feelings, but the feelings themselves, just noticing. And then again, becoming aware of just sensations in your body. So if anything hurts, you can adjust your position. But again, just noticing it as sensation. So trying not to think about the sensation, but just noticing it as pure sensation. And bringing your awareness into your breath. Wherever it's easiest to do this, you can pay attention to your breath at your belly, in your throat, or in your nostrils. Just starting with a sense of awareness, again, without judgment, of wherever your breath is, whether it's hard to breathe, whether you feel any restriction, just being aware of it. And then we're going to count the breath. So just gently regulating the breath and trying to make the inhale and exhale equal. And you can try this counting to 4. I'll count a few times. If this is not comfortable, you can adjust this. So you can count to 2 if that's easier, or 3 or longer. But you don't want to feel any strain in the breath. So just finding a place where you can feel an equilibrium. So inhaling 2, 3, 4, and exhaling 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. And continuing on your own, again, finding the rhythm that works for your own breath, where you can feel the inhale and exhale comfortably equal, and allowing the breath to be your anchor here. And even with the breath as your anchor, you might notice that your mind thinks, your body feels sensations. So if you notice your mind thinking, just try not to follow the thought. Try not to judge the thought, but just call it thinking. And you can imagine the thought like a cloud, and just allow that cloud to blow with the wind out of your mind. And so with anytime a thought arises, again, just calling it thinking, not following it, not reacting to it, not judging it, but just allowing it to be a cloud that blows across the sky of your mind. And similarly, if you feel a sensation in your body, or if you feel an emotion, just labeling it, sensation, feeling, thinking, and allowing these all to be clouds, and allowing the clouds to blow across the sky of your mind with your breath. And so still keeping your attention in the breath. So the breath throughout this is the anchor. It's the point that you keep returning to. And this is also a place where if you wanted to try a mantra, you could make the mantra your anchor instead of or in addition to the breath. So if you want to try repeating in your mind, Sukha, good space, Sukha, 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 Sukha. Again, if that's helpful, you can repeat this mantra You can create your own mantra, just an instrument for your mind. You can keep your attention in your breath. And again, just allowing the thoughts to blow through your mind. And we'll just sit in silence, just very briefly, using these techniques before we finish. And I always like to end my meditation by dedicating my practice. So, whatever this means for you, so just kind of setting an intention that's maybe an intention for yourself and then also a greater intention. It can be for those you know and love or for the greater world. But just taking a moment so that your practice is bigger than just you and bigger than just these few moments. So just taking a moment, whatever that is. And then gently beginning to wake up your body. You can wiggle your fingers and toes and stretch a little bit. And taking your time to open your eyes and to transition back into the world, allowing the transition to be just as important as the practice.
Yeah. Sorry, that was amazing. And that
Thank you.
transition, I was thinking this would put you in such a good place before you have that stressful, moments in that divorce situation to get in the right headspace, just to do that. And I've seen it in a couple of things when you go to court and you wait out in the halls and it's like such an anxious time for people. I've never
Mhm.
seen anyone do anything like this, but, because probably because you would feel so shame, like people are judging you. But if you are in court, and I feel so much energy when I see all the attorneys there, you can go the other side where no one's around and
Nobody
in a
has
different,
to know you're doing
yeah,
it. That's the
no one,
thing.
yeah,
It can be
yeah.
a secret.
Right. Don't hang around with all these people with all this negative energy. Go way around. And then even if you're just walking around and you can do something like this, I think you'll be in a much better place. And I hope if you're in more of a settlement posture or something, have these conferences to put yourself in this space, I think will help you really be more creative and not so reactive. So I really appreciate you doing that, Zoe. It brought me back to to when I used to come to you all the time and having that wonderful feeling. So thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
doing that. And I really want to thank you for doing this conversation, Zoe. You really are a great teacher. You really have been someone for me who's taken me to the next level and make me get up so early and make it feel like I could do it. And that's it. And that's what you want a teacher to do, to make you feel that you can do that. And I try to do that for my clients, to help them that I am gonna, be hopeful that we are gonna go through this hard time. So I appreciate all you're doing out there. So keep it up. And thank you for being on this podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.